Hello dear learners, welcome to this SWAYAM NPTEL online course on inclusive education. I am Dr. Umakant Prasad, an assistant professor from Department of Education, Vinay Bhavan, Vishwa Bharati Shantiniketan. This is week 10 and today we are going to discuss about women education in India, a historical review. During this lecture, we will discuss about women education in ancient and Vedic era, women education in post-Vedic decline and early medieval exclusion, later medieval period, colonial revival and social reforms, and women education during the post-independence era, that is the era of reforms and educational expansion. Empowering women is important for the economic and social progress of a country. Women play a vital role in development and their social, economic and political empowerment promotes progress. They play a vital role in society and have a significant impact on social progress. In ancient India, especially during the Vedic era, women enjoyed a respected and honored position with significant rights and high social status. They had access to education and actively participated in intellectual and spiritual life, with female sages such as Gargi, Maitreyi and Ghosa contributing to literary traditions. Women were respected as mothers, scholars and even warriors. They had the right to choose their partners through Swayamvar and were involved in decision making processes. However, this high status began to gradually decline in the later ancient periods due to increasing patriarchal norms. Women education in India reveals a dynamic and evolving arc beginning with intellectual empowerment during the Vedic age, moving through suppression in the medieval period and Renaissance during 19th and 20th century, inspired by social reformers and nationalist leaders. It is essential to analyze this trend to understand current inequalities and determine a future direction for genuine gender equality in education. The evolution of women education in India can be traced through 5 key historical phases. First, ancient and Vedic era. Second, post-Vedic decline and early medieval exclusion. Third, later medieval period, that is constants and emergent spirituality, colonial revival and social reforms, and post-independence reforms and educational expansion. Let us discuss the status of women during the ancient and Vedic era. The Vedic scriptures prove that there was a culturally open environment where women could actively participate in intellectual life. It was a time when women were not only respected and honored, but also participated equally in social and spiritual spheres. Therefore, it is said that the strongest roots of women empowerment and education were established in ancient times, especially during the early Vedic era. Especially during the Rig Vedic period, women enjoyed a high status and had access to education, social freedom and religious rituals. Alketar rightly stated that one of the most effective ways to understand the spirit and limitation of a civilization is to examine the status and place of women in it. The Rig Veda mentions female sages such as Gargi, Lopamudra, Apala and Ghosa, highlighting the contribution of women to the literary and spiritual tradition of the time. At the time, there were 2 types of female scholars, the Brahmavadini, who remained unmarried and pursued education throughout her life, and the Sadyodha, who continued to study until she married. Gargi, Vachaknavi and Maitri were famous female scholars described in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. They were involved in philosophical discussions with male scholars such as Yagvalk. Gargi earned the title of Brahmavadini, meaning a woman dedicated to the pursuit of Brahmanical knowledge by questioning the fundamentals of universe. Similarly, Maitri's teaching on self-nature reflected a level of intellectual maturity equal to that of her male contemporaries. Anthropological studies showed that initiation rites in some varnas were not solely for men in earlier times, but indicating an early subtle gender dimension within the Vedic education practices. However, these practices were mostly accessible to upper caste women and eventually diminished. In early Vedic society, education was not gender exclusive. Women too had the opportunity to study the Vedas and were also recognized as teachers. Terms like Upadhyay, that is female teachers, and Upadhyani, that is married female teacher, indicate the institutional presence of women educators. Additionally, women were free to choose their partners through practices such as Swayamvar and even cohabitation through Gandharva marriage. There was no mention of child marriage in the Vedas, and widow remarriage was not forbidden. The epic period emphasizes the establishment of dharma in texts such as the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, where major female characters such as Sita, Draupadi, Kunti and Gandhari represent moral strength and suffering, which ultimately guides important moral decisions. Even women of the Kshatriya class participated in wars, which shows their involvement in political affairs. However, along with this, the Devdasi system also began to emerge. Post-Vedic decline and early medieval exclusion. The decline in the status of women in India is often traced back to the early medieval period. While the Vedic period had provided women with notable rights, many of these freedoms began to erode by the early medieval era. After entering into the post-Vedic and early medieval periods, pedagogical access for women receded significantly. Women gradually lost their political rights, such as right to attend assemblies, and the practice of child marriage became widespread. Widow remarriage was increasingly discouraged, and over the time, women were relegated to subordinate status from family to society. However, the later period of ancient Indian history saw the beginning of a gradual decline in the status of women. Kautilya Arthashastra intensified patriarchal control. According to this text, patriarchal norms are reflected in the matters related to property, marriage and compensation. The Manu Smriti, composed around 2000 BC, introduced restrictions on women autonomy, stating that a woman should be under the guardianship of a father in childhood, husband in youth and sons in old age. This marked a significant shift from more egalitarian values to characterize the earlier Vedic period. In the eras when Jainism and Buddhism were flourished, women appeared to enjoy a broader sense of freedom and dignity, particularly in areas like education, spirituality and the arts. Unlike the rigid restrictions seen later, this was a time when many women could take part in religious life not only as followers but as respected teachers and thinkers. Similarly, Sanghmitra, the daughter of Emperor Ashoka, played a key role in carrying Buddhism to other parts of the world, which speaks volume about the trust placed in her capability. Princess Jayanti of Kosambi, who deliberately chose not to marry so she could pursue a life of philosophical learning. She reportedly engaged in dialogue with Mahavira himself before becoming a nun. Aside from spiritual roles, many women wrote hymns and poetry in Sanskrit. Others showed exceptional talent in painting and music. Despite these cultural and religious openings, women saw a gradual decline in their economic independence and were largely excluded from the political decision making. Later medieval period constants and emergent spirituality. In the late medieval period, the status of woman was complex and deeply shaped by a variety of social, political and religious developments. In many parts of India, especially in Muslim households, women were confined to private spaces called janana, which limited their public visibility and participation. Nevertheless, this century saw notable exceptions, which women breaking traditional barriers and becoming powerful individuals. The medieval period witnessed stringent restrictions and social controls, that is parda, compulsory child marriage, banning widow remarriage and also amplified women's marginalization, especially in Islamic and Orthodox Hindu communities. Girls were rarely included in the madrasa system and arose during medieval Sultanate and Mughal administration. However, resistance and expression persisted through the Bhakti Sufi syncretic spiritual renaissance. Women like Mirabai, Akka, Mahadevi and Andal authored devotional poetry in vernacular languages that challenged social hierarchy and asserted women's spiritual agency. Sikhism, preached by Guru Nanak, emphasized gender equality and encouraged women to participate in spiritual practices and led religious gatherings. Guru Nanak challenged prevailing patriarchal norms and advocated for the equal spiritual and social status of women, laying a progressive foundation that empowered them within the religious and cultural fabric of society. Colonial revival and social reform. During the 19th and 20th centuries, women's movements addressed social issues such as education and widow remarriage as well as liberation struggles. Women's empowerment in India began during British control. After 1800, women were empowered through various socio-cultural, religious and political movements led by reformist leaders. Missionary societies such as Church Missionary Society and Baptist Mission began setting up girls' schools in major cities in Calcutta, Madras and Bombay from 1820s. The 19th century saw a turning point when reformers like Rajaram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar and Jyoti Rao Phule took initiative for advancement of women. Rajaram Mohan Roy's effort resulted in the abolition of the practice of sati. Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar's effort to improve the condition of widow resulted in the Widow Remarriage Act of 1856. Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi fought bravely against the British, exhibiting her military skills. These reforms laid the groundwork for systematic change, further accelerated by the introduction of Western education and legal frameworks during the British rule. Savitribai Phule emerged as a revolutionary figure in 1848 by breaking societal norms and advocating for women's right to knowledge and became India's first female educator. Women's political awakening gained momentum when in 1917 the first women's delegation demanded political rights supported by Indian National Congress. In 1927, the All India Women's Education Conference has cemented education as a tool for empowerment. Women's political awakening gained momentum when in 1917 the first women's delegation demanded political rights supported by the Indian National Congress. In 1927, the All India Women's Education Conference had cemented education as a tool for empowerment. Women also played a crucial role in India's freedom struggle. Famous leaders for freedom included Dr. Annie Besant, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, Aruna Asaf Ali, Sucheta Kriplani and Kasturba Gandhi. The Rani of Jhansi regiment of Subhash Chandra Bose Indian National Army was made up completely of women, notably Captain Lakshmi Sahgal. Sarojini Naidu was the first Indian woman to be president of the Indian National Congress and governor of a state in India. All India Women's Conference, the Young Women's Christian Association and the Anjuman-e-Islam were the organizations which not only challenged regressive practices, but played a vital role in advocating for women's education, social reform and legal rights, providing a platform for women to organize, raise their voices and influence public policy during the colonial and early post-independence periods. These pre-independence initiatives provided a strong platform for post-independence reform. In addition, Bethany College in Calcutta and the SNDT Women's University in Bombay emerged as major centers for promoting women's educational advancement in colonial India. Post-independence reforms and educational expansion. The period following India's independence in 1947 marked a significant turning point in the history of women education. The newly formed nation, guided by the principles of equality and justice enshrined in the Constitution, recognized education as a fundamental right and a critical driver of social change. The Indian Constitution guaranteed equal rights to all citizens regardless of gender under Article 14, that is equality before law, Article 15, that is prohibition of discrimination, and Article 21, that is right to education. These constitutional provisions laid the foundation for a series of reforms aimed at making education accessible to women and girls across the country. In the early decades of independence, the Indian government focused on creating an inclusive education system. The national policy on education, first formulated in 1968 and revised in 1986 and 1992, emphasized the removal of disparities and promotion of equal educational opportunities, particularly for women, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. The 1986 policy was especially pivotal, introducing measures such as Mahila Samakhya program, which aimed to empower rural women through education and collective action. It recognized that education for women was not just about literacy, but also about building awareness, confidence and capacity for social and economic participation. In the decades that followed, a range of centrally sponsored schemes and state level initiatives sought to expand educational access for girls. The Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, launched in 2001, aimed to achieve universal elementary education and included gender specific strategies such as the provision of free uniforms, textbooks and gender sensitive infrastructure like separate toilets for girls. The Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalaya scheme was launched under Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan to provide residential schooling for girls from disadvantaged communities. Further, the Right to Education Act 2009 made education as a fundamental right for children aged 6 to 14 years old and mandated non-discrimination in school admissions. Programs like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, launched in 2015, added a renewed focus on changing mindsets, promoting the value of girls and improving child sex ratio through education and awareness campaigns. Despite these efforts, challenges remain. Gender disparities persist, particularly in rural areas and among marginalized communities. Dropout rates for girls increase significantly at the secondary level, often due to poverty, early marriage, safety concerns or social norms that dilute girls' education. In addition, the digital divide and inadequate infrastructure in many regions hinder equal access to quality education. Nevertheless, post-independence India had witnessed remarkable progress in women's education. Female literacy rate has risen from around 8.86% in 1951 to over 65.46% in 2011. Women were increasingly participating in higher education and entering diverse professional fields. The period of post-independence reforms has therefore been one of both institutionalization and evolution, laying the groundwork for gender parity in education while highlighting the need for continued effort to overcome deep-rooted social and structural barriers. The journey of women education in India reflects the nation's broader struggle for equality, justice and social transformation. From the intellectual freedom of Vedic period to suppression during medieval times and from reforms during British era to the policy driven expansion after independence, the trajectory has been both complex and inspiring. Significant progress has been made. Female literacy rates have increased, girls are enrolling in schools and universities in greater numbers, and women are breaking barriers in various fields. However, deep-rooted challenges such as gender-based discrimination, societal norms, poverty and infrastructural gaps continue to hinder true educational equality. Achieving genuine gender parity requires sustained efforts not only through policy and programs, but also through changing mindsets and empowering communities. There are some references here. Thank you.